Bonjour, bienvenue. My name is Ben Gibson. I'm chairing this panel. Welcome back to the third edition of Scenario, presented by the Institut Français with many partners from British Council to CNC to the National Film School and the London Film School, which is where I'm from. We have a very high-powered panel for you this afternoon, and we're going to discuss very basic and profound things about screenwriting. I hope we'll see whether we get somewhere, because big questions sometimes get very small answers. We'll see what happens. It happened at the beginning of this process that we knew we had a film which you will hear more of, which has absolutely no dialogue being performed to you. And we had two filmmakers, two cineasts who are known for their brilliant and witty dialogue, sort of back to back in one program. So it was natural that we thought, let's discuss dialogue in a screenwriting event. I'm going to try and draw out of the panel some reactions to where screenwriting fits in their own work, different approaches to it, and so on. I should introduce geographically. On my left, Paul Ryan, who is going to translate for us very kindly. Thank you very much. It is about to appear in his own right in a rather different role in the next program today, and who many of you know, who's a doyen on presentation and interpretation and welcoming in this institution. And to his right, Jean-Pierre Bacri and Agnès Jaoui, who many of you have been enjoying a retrospective of their work in the course of this week. So I won't go through laboriously their CVs for you, because you will have been experiencing them. And then on my far right, Troy Kennedy-Martin, one of the most distinguished screenwriters working in the UK, whose credits for people who watch British television think about Edge of Darkness and all kinds of things, all the way back to Z-Cars and so on. And then there's also international movies like Kelly's Heroes and The Italian Job, very famously. Most recently, he's written Red Dust, and so we're very glad to have Troy Kennedy-Martin here. He's also been teaching in the workshop, which is running parallel with these events. Laurence Corrière, to his left, is one of two people on this panel who are actually French filmmakers or French writers and directors who have chosen to base themselves in the UK. So although it seems like an entirely French panel, apart from Troy and myself, actually that's not quite right. So Laurence Corrière has written Me Without You, a film that Sandra Goldbasher directed, and Wonderland, which is a Michael Winterbottom film, which she's recently become a director, and she just made a film called Being Bad, a short film called Being Bad. And on her left, Sylvian Chaumet is well known as an animator to many people. It's shot to fame massively in the last 2 years with Belleville Rendezvous, and he's about to do, as you will have read in your program, a Jacques Tati film very shortly. So that is our panel. I want to start proceedings off by just trying to work out at what stage in the conception of a film dialogue becomes important and the writing of dialogue. Perhaps I can start by asking somehow two filmmakers who are writing together. You are writing. There are many, for instance, now television series that we watch which are written by more than one writer, so that dialogue is constructed, as it were, in the process of writing, through role play in some way in the writing process. Do you think that either of you, as individual writers, would write dialogue in a similar way when you're writing on your own? Or is it really about something which is quite close to performance, quite close to the moment of performance, the way you construct relationships between characters?
we can just speak about our way of doing things, of course.
Yeah.
And we begin by the story, very, very precisely, the construction of the story. In fact, no, we begin by the characters, to define the more precisely possibly the characters, and the theme, the main theme or the main themes, and what we want to say, in fact. What is our demonstration, or our point of view, at least. So what are the characters who are going to carry our point of view, or not? And this is the most, in fact, difficult and important, to know exactly about whom we are speaking. Because it's so easy to write clichés. It's very hard to avoid them. And for us, the way of avoiding cliché is to stick to a kind of reality, to stick to people we know, and to be inspired by them. And then we begin the construction of the story, point by point, step by step, until the very end.
And the story of each character. You don't hear me.
Yes. Yes, and the story of each character. Mais non, c'est Et after this painful and long process, we begin the dialogue, and these are holidays then, because but sometimes, of course, a dialogue is written since the beginning, but just because
because it's in the character biography.
No.
No.
No, because it helps us to fix what we want to say, the contradiction or the problem or
the terms of the argument, the philosophical structure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, let me just to balance that. I want to really to ask a question straightforwardly to Jean-Pierre to follow that up. So, as you're writing, Agnès has explained the structure of preparation. As you're writing about a character, and you're taking your notes on the characters that you're going to work with, do you write about whether they always answer a question with a question, whether they use the word exactement, or whether they have a certain way of pausing when they speak? Do you create a dialogue characterization?
Yes.
Could you give us an example of a character? That's what I want, really. An example of a character that we've seen this week that is working that way. Where you have a certain idea about the way that they conduct dialogue.
En fait, je suis un imposteur. Je n'ai jamais écrit. Je suis venu ici par goût, parce que j'aime la ville. Et lorsque j'ai su que Agnès, que je connais quand même depuis un certain temps, venait à Londres, je me suis dit, c'est bon. Et je lui ai dit, s'il te plaît, prends-moi dans tes bagages, enfin démerde-toi pour dire que par exemple, je sais pas, par exemple, j'ai écrit avec toi. Et c'est ce qu'elle a fait parce qu'elle m'aime bien et qu'elle voulait que je vienne à Londres. Et donc voilà, je tenais à le dire parce que je sens qu'il va y avoir un malentendu.
For those of you who missed that, Jean-Pierre was explaining that he's an imposter. He doesn't write at all, and that he's only here really because he likes the city of London. And he's known Agnès for many years, and he asked her would she please bring him with her to London and just pass him off as someone who writes with her. But he's not really a writer at all, he says. Lie.
Yeah. Well, I'm very grateful for your interpretation of the role of the writer.
Non, mais bien sûr que c'est pas pour redevenir sérieux, parce qu'il ne faut quand même pas déconner. En fait, on peut parler français, quoi, finalement.
Oui.
Je vais continuer, puisque je vois que ça marche quand même bien. J'en ai pas anglais, ils ont quand même une vraie notion. Donc, oui, bien sûr que chaque personnage est traité différemment, puisque ce que disait Agnès, on s'inspire de gens qu'on connaît, enfin, sinon qu'on connaît personnellement, qu'on voit évoluer dans la vie, que ce soit sur la place publique ou dans la sphère privée. Et donc, ensuite, on réunit 2 ou 3 ou 4 personnages qui ressemblent à celui qu'on veut traiter, et on écrit le rôle, et évidemment, il se dégage une façon de parler, de se comporter selon son milieu, d'où il vient, etc. Et donc, évidemment que chaque personnage a une façon de s'exprimer. En tout cas, on voudrait bien que chaque personnage ait sa façon. Pourtant, j'ai jamais fait. C'est peut-être que c'est trop long.
Jean-Pierre says don't shoot if it's shorter next time. He was explaining there, to be serious for a moment, that it's important for each character to have its own way of speaking, expressing himself, and that they draw on characters. They draw on characters from private life and public life as well, and mix different people in order to create an individual character. And that character's language, the way of expressing him or herself, comes from the world in which they are themselves attached. And so it's important for each character to have his or her own specific way of expressing him or herself.
Vous l'avez compris?
Just there.
And one more question, just says that your work is starting in the theatre and moving into cinema. And although the early films in a way are adaptations of plays, and they open out a play but only to a limited degree, then Look at Me and Des Autres are films in an absolute sense. But while you're preparing them, are there moments where you try and say, how can this be expressed without dialogue? Or how can we turn this dialogue into something which is more visual, more non-dialogue? Does that happen?
No. Not really. Pas vraiment. No, I don't know if I have to speak in English or in French. No.
Well, we can have a show of hands of how many English speakers. No, the panel needs to understand. Translation will continue.
Bon, non, on n'a pas changé notre méthode de travail.
Non.
Vous avez raison que, bien sûr, au cinéma, des tas de choses peuvent s'exprimer sans dialogue, même au théâtre, à vrai dire. Et que nous, on est plutôt bavards, au théâtre comme au cinéma. Et on n'a finalement pas changé notre méthode d'écriture beaucoup.
Yeah, so Agnès was just saying that they haven't changed their way of working from the theatre to the cinema. That it's true, Ben is quite right to say that there are ways of expressing oneself without dialogue in cinema and also in the theatre. But they're very talkative in the theatre, very talkative also in the cinema. So they haven't really changed the method in which they work together.
Oh, thank you, George. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you with more. I just want to ask Troy Kennedy Martin a question, which is really about dialogue as a starting point in writing or as a middle point. people have, I mean, when we have conversations about cinema, we remember a particular line of dialogue, and generally it's a one-liner. It's not really a dialogue between a couple of people. It's not something that expresses a conflict or a situation. So there's always, you know, frankly, I don't give a damn, but of course, actually, Troy's got his own, which is, you're only supposed to blow off the bloody doors. And I'm sure he's got others. That's the only one I know of immediately to hand. But in a way, that isn't dialogue. That's the way we talk about dialogue. But are there situations where you're at the beginning of a story and fragments from your notebook, which you're reading about the dialogue that's going to happen, are at the beginning of the writing, or is it something that happens after you've got the skeleton of the storyline?
No, does this work?
Try it. Go. I think it works.
Hello?
Yeah. Yes.
That's working. I think the line was you were supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
I'm sorry.
But of course, I never thought it was a good line, and it's the way it's actually shot that made it memorable to those people who write that film. So now, when I get introduced to someone, so I'm often introduced where people will shout that line out to me, but I mean, it's not really.
They shout at you on the street, so
Or my son.
yeah.
No, but the truth is, you really start off with the dialogue as a form of exercise, bearing in mind that a little bit of the story is in one part of your brain, and also elements of action that might form the character as well. But the dialogue goes on for quite a long time because one's trying to use it as, it's not so much about exposition, but you really have to try and find a voice for that particular character. And it will only come sometimes after writing the scenes or several scenes, usually from the middle of the kind of script, which doesn't exist, maybe 20 or 30 times until eventually the character begins to work on its own. And in, for instance, Age of Darkness, I became so involved with Jedburgh, who was the American CIA man who was played by John Baker, that, I mean, every time Bob, when the producer would say, give Bob Baker a line, or because he's really a bit short of running, you give him one, and then the Jedburgh character would immediately come out with 5. So you want to get to a position where you really know whether the characters are really working on their own, they're actually expressing their own kind of ways. And then you cut right back on it down to maybe 5 or 10 lines that you're very careful to kind of husband. And then you see most of those trampled on your set. So one part of you is actually trying to cut things right down, just as a sort of matter of discipline, so that you just get this one single distilled phrase. And on the other hand, you're actually using as much time as you can, just writing pages and pages and pages of how those people would speak and what they think about. And at the same time, you're sketching out scenes where there's action involved, and then you suddenly see there's one little bit of the action that really defines that character. Such as Kelly's hero, Clint Eastwood. He's behind enemy lines and he's just dividing ammunition amongst this group of soldiers. And he throws a clip at one soldier who grabs it like this and actually pushes it onto the fire, so suddenly we all die because these bullets are going off in all sorts of directions. And then he throws the next clip exactly in the same position so that he doesn't catch it and go into the fire. But this time the guy catches it. And you think, well, that's an interesting thing that happened, but you don't plan for that, it just comes to a head. It's a very small piece of thing, but you build up the way he handles men and things like that.
And you're saying that that action, in a way, as a piece of characterization, starts with the writing of dialogue, and then the dialogue gradually goes away and leaves way for that.
Yeah, I mean, in Kelly's Heroes, I think the first 35 pages of Clint Eastwood, who was the lead character, didn't have one line of dialogue. And then, which was one reason he liked the script. But then, you know, the producer and the director wanted them to have dialogue, and that's just so this is push in, whereas you've got actors like in the classic who really prefer not to.
Well, Clint Eastwood's an interesting, because also his iconic thing then was because of the Italian westerns. He was supposed to be so tight-lipped that you never actually saw his teeth, which was like, that was Bonanza, and then cinema you weren't supposed to see movies now.
Yeah.
When you're constructing a character biography, are you writing? I mean, I know because there are American writers famously who write the monologue from the coffee bar, where somebody says, "Look, ever since I was a kid, I've been fighting for this," and they characterize themselves in 30 lines of monologue in some scene, kind of 40 pages into the film. But do you write sort of words for the character that we don't know where they're going to go yet in the script, but they are in the black notebook?
Yeah, well, we're in a great sheet of paper, but certainly for treatment, you must have just a few lines of dialogue. It's very difficult to write a treatment. Producers say, can we just have a treatment, or can you give us 6 pages about what the story's about? But unless you've actually written the scenes, so you may as well write a draft of a script, actually, and then cut it back to 6 pages and drop in 3 or 4 lines. Because it's actually those lines that actually make it a line and give it some sort of. But so it's a bit cheap when producers ask you for one thing and you have to do another else.
And do you have actors' pictures stuck on your wall? Because lots of directors who are writers do, but in fact you're writing for, say, Clint Eastwood or Michael Caine without knowing that you're writing for them.
Well, I've got a vision, and I thought about Clint Eastwood and Michael Caine, both those cases.
Oh, right. So that was the ideal casting before the.
For me, it was, yeah.
Thank you. I want to get back to you. I want to ask Laurence. You're now becoming a director, and you're writing. In a way, you've been here for a long time, but you're writing in observational realism in English. But it's very striking that as a writer from France, you'd be writing Wonderland, Michael Winterbottom's film, which is a very observational realist film. Is a lot of the dialogue that you write in a film like that overheard? I mean, are you a sampler of dialogue which you then give to characters when it seems to fit them? So do you have general bits of dialogue, or is the whole? Do you see what I mean?
No.
Are you collecting people in the East End talking to each other outside their houses about their family life, and then saying, that fits there, or is it much more collectional process that you find?
It's always a mixture, because you like all the time you've got an ear and you're listening to people and you're observing. So I might have a notebook and have little bits that might come back and fit in one character. But otherwise, it's pretty much, very much what both you have said, really. It's a process, and through the process, you discover the character and how they speak and how they. For me, also, what I would add is that I've got a different experience because, you're also actors, so it's very different. And with Wonderland, they did a lot of improvisation as well. So some actors really like improvisation, and they came up with some of the best lines out of the script. But I think they felt comfortable with that because the characters were very well defined. So that they came up and told me I could do that because it was there, and other didn't improvise because they didn't want to. So there was enough there to kind of of the mood. But I guess the dialogue I don't think is particularly. It doesn't have to be said that way necessarily. I think so I can be French and write English dialogue, and I think people have said it's very good.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think they could go and make it their own. It doesn't matter to me.
And have you ever been experienced people who are trying to buy dialogue polish of your work? I mean, producers who are saying, let's polish the dialogue.
No, that's not what
Has it happened to you, Troy? I mean, you've worked more in industrial films. It's never happened.
No. Well, that's different from directors taking their best friend home from night, getting drunk, and then rewriting the script.
Yeah.
I think that's a polish.
Yeah, so, oh, right, directors getting drunk, not a polish, that's them just rewriting
Yeah.
at will.
The other thing, I'm sorry.
That wasn't happened to you. Lawrence.
The other thing I was going to add about kind of when you asked the question about the visual side is that in a way, you know, it's like you create the scene out of you know, somebody might look at somebody in a certain way and say the line in lying, or you know, so you create a situation. So that I would say is a visual indication in the script that you would have to put in a sense, which is maybe. It's a balance of trying to do it not being a director, being a writer. It's that kind of balance to get right, so that then the dialogue, you know, is within that context.
Yeah, but are there occasions when, because I mean, a lot of, I mean, to me, looking at a Jaoui Bacri script, there's a lot of, you know, something which starts in a very sweet way, which is a familial thing, but then something is mentioned which generates a reference to a history which is terribly loaded with difficulty, and out of the same conversation, all kinds of completely different moods and colours will happen, particularly in family dialogue. You know it's happened 1,000 times. So in a way it's like he looks and he says it, but he's lying, kind of thing. So you're trying to generate something out of the nature of that dialogue and where it's going in the characterization. Aren't there often occasions when directors are saying, well, I just want that person to say what they're supposed to say, but looking at the flaw. In other words, I'm going to bring it down to one simple, very small visual idea, all of the things you're doing with the dialogue. And I'm over-suggesting, maybe that doesn't happen.
No, not really.
No, because that would mean that the dialogue is not good.
Yeah.
That it is not useful.
It's not economical. It's, yeah. It's
Yeah, I mean, we write a lot, but we try to say, it's not that it is essential things, but to on the opposite, our job is justement de travailler le dialogue sur des choses très très simples, mais qui en fait signifient des tas de choses, où il y a un sous-entendu déjà. Et the silence is very important in the dialogue.
Yeah.
And oui, ça signifie beaucoup.
Yeah, so Agnès was just saying that it's important for them to work on dialogue in what, so that simple things are being said, or it may seem to be being said, but underneath there are very complicated things being expressed in the dialogue in that way. So the significations are very important.
Alors c'est marrant parce que on constate, parce qu'avant, au tout début, on procédait d'une certaine façon qui était de chacun écrire dans son coin selon la scène qu'il était question d'écrire aujourd'hui, d'écrire chacun ses dialogues dans un coin, et puis de les confronter ensuite. Et puis on a constaté au fur et à mesure que ça servait quasiment à rien, parce que si la situation que vous avez créée est suffisamment forte, les urgences se dégagent toutes seules pour les personnages. Et chaque personnage est obligé de parler ou de ne pas parler à des moments, parce que la structure qu'on a créée pour la scène est tellement précise, c'est-à-dire qu'on est tellement parano là-dessus, c'est-à-dire qu'on travaille tellement sur pourquoi et comment, etc., que tous les deux, on se retrouve devant quasiment la même scène. Si on se met chacun de son côté, on aurait écrit quasiment la même scène, parce qu'il y a des urgences qu'on ne peut pas contourner, et ce qui n'est pas urgent, on ne l'écrit pas.
So Jean-Pierre was just adding there that when they began working together, writing together, they would each go to their own corner of the room, so to speak, and work on a particular scene which had been set to be worked on that day, and each write the scene in their own individual way. But what they found was that the scene was so precisely set for the characters that the characters would speak when they needed to speak and express what they needed to express in certain ways, so that when they brought the two different ways of writing the scene together, they've written in more or less the same scene, because the the situation demanded, if it's sufficiently strong, the situation demanded that characters speak at certain points, do not speak at certain other points, and that's precisely what they were finding that they were doing. They were creating the same scene more or less.
Et à rebours, et au contraire, on a constaté par exemple souvent que bon, il arrive qu'une fois que la scène est écrite, on veuille y apporter tout d'un coup, parce que l'humeur de la journée où on est en train d'écrire, l'envie de fantaisie nous prend et on commence à bouger la scène, à l'améliorer, croit-on, avec certaines choses. Et il nous est arrivé souvent d'adorer une formule, une phrase, une saillie drôle, et ça ne tient pas à la lecture. C'est-à-dire que quand on l'a relu 2 fois, on se sent obligé, enfin, il est hors de question de le garder, parce que justement ça n'est pas nécessaire. On sent que, enfin, on traque la complaisance, quoi. Donc si on lit une scène et qu'on s'aperçoit qu'on fait les intéressants, bah, tout d'un coup il n'y a plus d'urgence, il n'y a plus de nécessité, et donc on se retrouve souvent à couper des choses qui nous plaisent.
And also what's happened when they've been working on scenes, depending on the particular mood that they're in on the day, that they may be putting material into a scene, and maybe putting dialogue into a scene, and maybe funny lines and things like that, which they like very, very much. But then when they reread the scene and see what the scene demands, they find that these lines, no matter how much they like them, are really not necessary. They don't belong to the urgency of the characters in the scene. So those they find themselves very often cutting lines they're very attached to, that they like very much.
Thank you. I just want to ask one more question to Laurence, which is really about, it's just about realist writing and dialogue. I often read scripts where I think, well, one of the problems with this is that the convention is that this person has to be less articulate than the viewers of the film because of various associations. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, I suppose, about Tarantino as a writer, for instance, is that he makes criminals very articulate people, which is very eccentric of him to do, because normally we're quite sure that they can't speak properly or express their emotions. Have you had ever had any struggle with that? I mean, looking at Wonderland, your characters are more articulate maybe than other characters in those kind of films to me, but still there's a limitation on how much they can say.
See, I wouldn't have thought of it that way. I wouldn't have thought they're more articulate than, so they were realistic.
Yeah.
But because especially with the example is Tarantino. I mean, that's very true. It's a very specific kind of writing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have thought. I mean, you did think that they're more articulate?
Well, they're more articulate than the people in an equivalent thriller set in the same milieu, for instance. If you take those people and you put them in Along Good Friday, or you put them in
yeah, because the story. The
Our
story.
Boy or something. I don't know.
But the story isn't a thriller. The story is the story of the ordinary.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
do you think they were more articulate in the ordinary than?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think it's that balance between creating dialogue that's kind of realistic, but also essentializing and making it interesting, and by creating a subtext. And so it's film, so you have to kind of heighten it a little bit. Maybe.
But now becoming a director, looking at your own dialogue, I mean, I know it's a short film so far, maybe it'll be a feature in the future. Are you sitting there and looking at it again as a director and saying, what do I think of this, this dialogue scene as the director of my own?
It's very different. I would have a different style as a director. I wouldn't use as much dialogue. I would go with the visuals, so I would use dialogue in a different way. So if I look at Wonderland, I think it's perfect for Michael, because that's very deep. But I'm not sure that would have been the right film for me to direct.
Yeah. Partly because there's so much dialogue.
Yeah.
But in a draft of your short film, do you find that you're trying to transmute the dialogue into something else? Find another way of doing it which is not dialogue while you're writing?
Yes, I guess so. I think, yeah. I kind of think of ideas of well, as a whole as well. Yeah, the whole concept of the whole film as a kind of visual concept. Yeah. But it's a question of, yes, different taste and different style and approach, just like Tarantino is a different approach to dialogue.
Okay, so there's a great moment to get to a director who is dealing with directing, but not really with dialogue. So, because Sylvian is making films where, in a way, the talking is a part of the music of life in the background somehow, I suppose. I don't know if that's a good way of representing you.
Yes, music is important. I've actually been involved with dialogues a lot before moving to animation. I was working for comic book artists and I was doing writing these dialogues, and everything was actually based on dialogue. It was actually very talkative in my comic books. And that was before actually I moved to England and discovered animation. And it's a very technical thing actually, why I'm not using dialogues in my films, or the 30 films, another thing, but it's basically that you have to record the voices of the characters before, and then you have to animate them talk, which is the most boring thing. And you just go, you spend a lot of time with them, and then say things, and at the end, people are going to look at their mouth. And it's very difficult, and it can be really tactical, and most of the time it's tactical, it doesn't really fit. So when I discovered animation in the art, animating the character, just seeing like a move was really amazing. And I just decided to swap the dialogues. And there are voices, but they're not afterwards actually. But they're not saying any.
But they're not determining the story or
no.
creating the setting or fixing the characters.
No, I think that I really think that animation and I think cinema is basically also the same. It's all about timing and music. And we're talking about Agnès and Jean-Pierre. What's important as well in their dialogues is the timing, which is crucial. The silence when they're going to say something, the music of the words. I suppose when you write the dialogues, you speak them, and it's another kind of music. And staying in animation, I don't think I've got dialogues, but I'd quite like to. If I move towards live action, probably be very talkative as well.
But Tati is somebody who is, in a way, in a tradition of. I mean, I suppose it's happening all the time because there's late Chaplin where he decides that it's for effects but not for talking, and then there's even. I mean, I was very struck by Besson's first film, The Dernier Combat, where you need to inhale oxygen in order to speak, so there's only 4 or 5 lines of dialogue in the whole film, and he creates that method. I heard Aki Kaurismäki saying that he gets so bored with writing that he can't write any dialogue for them, but also that because so few people speak Finnish and subtitling creates dangerous chemicals, they shouldn't speak in his films. And it's a ludicrous kind of rock and roll answer to a question that he was given. But there are people trying to stop themselves. And in a way, Tati is somebody who is kind of saying, because my work is about gesture and physicality and character, then anything which was, proper synchronized dialogue would in a way get in the way of watching that. So it's ballet.
Yes, and I also think that Tati was. I don't think that Tati was able to write dialogues. He's not coming from theatre. He's coming from musical. He was a mime basically. He started his career as a mime. He would carry on like that. And his film are mimes film.
Yeah.
Everything is expressing, and he's also very visual because he used to work for. At the beginning, before he even started to be a mime, he worked in a frame. One of his parents had a framing store. So he was framing pictures,
right.
And for me, it's very much like a mime who actually is framing and shooting framings, and they do the camera work that is very basic. You will have the camera always at the same position, which is basically his eyes level, and it's just like shooting a landscape or shooting a stage. It's very funny because I've been really watching a lot of Tati because to try to get back that feeling. What's so special about the Tati film, and what's so special is that you always see the feet of the characters.
Right.
It's never cut.
Yeah.
Sometimes some are passing very close to the camera, so they
Yeah.
cut, but most of the time you see the feet of the characters. It's very important for you to have feet in the cut. And it's all the expression as well. When you animate, when you create a character which is going to be quite, caricatural, quite deformed, you also feel like you want to see it move straight away. So you don't want to start, you want to see it move, and the dialogue is not going to be in what they're going to say through their mouth, but the way they're going to actually walk, the way they're going to do a little gesture, everyday gesture, like Madame Suzanne, for example, she's always putting a glass back all the time. They always have these little tics, and
which form a rhythm of their own.
yeah.
And then the cuts answer each other in a way, so there's a kind of argument, debate between characters in the cuts.
Yes, the whole thing is about, they are very solitary characters, and in a way, they're very solitaire, they're very special, each of them, and have really big problems to communicate. And I think that was interesting actually too. And Jean-Pierre and Agnès, also characters are not like superheroes, they are really like very lonesome people with their own, very typical mind and difficulties to communicate, and very human, very much like us actually. And it's something that you feel closer to the human, and I really like to see actually go see a film and see a mirror. I think it's very
Great, thank you. I've got a couple more general questions I want anybody to address, and then I'm going to try and open it up because we've got a little bit of time. Do we?
Yeah, but we got everything's running late.
A lot of filmmakers strive to develop a very specific style, and that sometimes hits their dialogue very strongly. And I'm just very interested in your views about the kind of, there is a kind of cult status which is about theatre really, I suppose, in terms of where it comes from, of Mamet and Pinter, which is about rhythm and repetition being very apparent to the audience. Have you? I mean, I know that the first time you ever met was in a production of a Pinter play, because I was here yesterday. So I'm just very interested in how you feel about the rhythm of two short speeches, one long speech, pauses, repetition of certain words. Are you aware of it? Do you have a... Okay.
When we are writing?
Yeah.
Yes. Directing is the same.
Yeah.
The rhythm is the most important thing. And so, of course, when we write, and in fact, our actors never improvise.
Yeah.
Because we are very, very precise about the silence, the point, we already, as we sung it.
And like you said yesterday, that your actors are able to work very hard around dialogue because they're theatre actors who are accustomed to that kind of work.
Yeah, and we rehearse with them. I mean, if they are not comfortable with the silence, of course we can change it, but it's very precise in the timing.
Because Troy would have worked with, indirectly worked with a number of actors who, want the minimum amount of dialogue and they don't want to remember it, or they want it written on a card just at the back, and it's a different thing. It's American cinema in terms of whether actors want to work hard on making the dialogue sophisticated or building up long scenes. Is that your experience?
Not really, no. They go on to say the lines and then they leave, and they maybe do it 2 or 3 times. But the good ones, they write on the button every time. I think in the West Coast, the advent of television has really destroyed a lot of the old ideas about dialogue and movies. And you were talking about the old, the monosyllabic.
The old monosyllabic film.
Yeah, but I think there was a lot of concern then about ambiguity. They saw cinema as very ambiguous, and audiences got a lot out of just looking at things which we just have these monosyllabic playable. But now I don't think it's like that at all. It's much more specific, it's much more conversation.
Because television is so dependent on more dialogue.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the style of Hollywood cinema is built on that television writing.
Yeah, particularly in the production process and things like that. They rely much more on it. And directors themselves tend to want some dialogue when you think there's a really visual piece of action. They'll still want something there just in case the shot hasn't worked out, or so it's a bit sort of absurd.
And when there are groups of writers, because American television is written often by groups of writers, and one of them has a particular brief for a certain character. They say, well, this is what he's doing, or this is what she's doing.
This
and then
is the television.
Television, like, you know, something where you've got somebody who's a producer, who's essentially the lead writer on, you know, on Friends or Roseanne or what, you know, Will and Grace or whatever. There's a group of people sitting around the table, as they did for Caesar's show of shows. It's a very American structure. But do you think that I think they write dialogue differently? I mean, in a sense, that it's much more of an emphasis on dialogue, because it's the conflicting voices of the characters is all that is being built up. Anyway.
I don't know much about it, but most of these shows are actually produced by writers. So
Yeah.
that really helps, I think.
Absolutely. But you've written British television, but always as a single writer.
Yeah.
And that's beginning to change now.
I haven't noticed it, but except in the soaps.
Okay, I'm going to throw it up to other people for their questions about dialogue in the cinema, or kind of general and specific. Has somebody got a microphone?
Yeah, hi. It's two things really. First of all, something that Troy Kennedy Martin said earlier about treatments and dialogue. And you were saying...
Can everyone hear you? Is the microphone on?
I don't know, is it?
Just have a fiddle with it, because I'm not sure we can hear you that well.
I think it's on, yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, that's good.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, something that Troy Kennedy Martin said earlier about dialogue and treatments, and saying that it's almost as if you need to have dialogue within the treatment. So in terms of like you specifically, like your process, because that's something that, like when I write, I like to dive in almost into the script, and then I find myself in a kind of cul-de-sac. It's like where am I going? So are you saying that maybe, for example, it's the process is outline, screenplay, then treatment, or is it just a little bit more involved and convoluted? And the second thing was about, you were saying about dialogue and non-dialogue, and I just thought about a film called Femrock. I don't know if anybody knows this movie, which is kind of like which has dialogue and doesn't somehow, because it's kind of gibberish in a way, and whether or not how that fits into the kind of general conversation that we're having about dialogue and its usefulness and so on. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm talking about treatments where you've just given a notion, some kind of idea to a producer, and they've said, yes, we really like that, and can you just run a few pages on it? And then, but you then find that you really have to draft out a screenplay to get these little, they're not gems, but the character lines, which just don't come out of nowhere. You've actually got to write the scenes maybe several times and then find various different. So we're talking about going into the middle sometimes of stories which you haven't written and trying to sort of mine something from that. But just even 4 or 5 lines in a short treatment makes a huge amount of difference in sort of demonstrating how the character would speak, or giving you some idea of some colour that you're going to get into the script. I mean, I'm doing a book now, but there was a great line in the book which I really liked, which was about an Afghan whose brother gets done for rape, and he's taken to the Old Bailey, where he gets 8 years, but he'd never seen the Old Bailey before, neither of them had, and they didn't really speak much English, and they'd no idea really what was going on. And when he gets 8 years and goes down, the other brother says he knew he was in trouble when he saw the size of the building. And that sort of encapsulates a lot of what that's about. So you're looking for the kind of lines that would give you that. And also, when the producers or anyone reads, they always go to the dialogue lines. They always go to the speech. So even if you've got a well thought out storyline, you have to break it up and put some sort of dialogue in it. I can't remember what the second part of
It was about Claude Faralda's film Themrock, which is another film in the canon of films which are kind of anti-dialogue films, of a certain kind, but rather an extraordinary one. I don't know how many people know this film. It's a film from the late 60s, I think, or the early 70s. Michel Piccoli is in it, and it's about an urban caveman. Claude Faralda made another film called Boff. I actually used to be the distributor in the UK of Themrock, yes. And Themrock is a movie where Michel Piccoli decides that he feels very amorous towards his sister, and his mother doesn't approve of it. He works in a factory where he has to constantly paint the outside gates, and there's another person who paints the inside gates. So that people make him do pointless things all day long, and he starts to grunt and become a caveman. He bricks up the rest of the house and knocks out his front window so that he's got a cave on the first floor in a Paris, sort of 10th arrondissement apartment. And then he does sleep with his sister, and then he gets hungry and he barbecues a policeman. It's an anarchist film. But what's wonderful is that it's all grunting. There's no actual language in the film, and just something which the British will appreciate, or you'll all appreciate as a sort of wonderful joke about tabloid newspapers, which is that when Channel 4 decided to have, I think they had purple triangle days where films were a bit more difficult for young people, and there were more interesting, censorable things going on in such a film. Jeremy Isaacs, the first film he chose for his Pink Triangle season was Themrock, which he bought from us, so everyone rang us and said, "What's this film, Themrock?" including from the Daily Express. And I explained that it was a film where nobody said anything, they just grunted, and a man slept with his sister and then barbecued a policeman, which, because they hadn't time to see the film, made the front page of the Express, because obviously it was such an outrageously disgusting thing. The fact that it was a rather beautiful film with Michel Piccoli just went over their heads. Sorry, that's rather irrelevant. Shall we get another question? There's one there. I think you need to click the microphone.
Voilà. Ma question s'adresse à Agnès et Jean-Pierre. Merci à tous d'être là d'ailleurs. Mais ce que je trouve qui rend vos films particulièrement subtils et intéressants et intelligents, c'est pas seulement ce que les personnages disent, mais leur façon d'être et dans les tout petits détails qu'on remarque. Et comme par exemple la moustache du personnage qui est joué par Jean-Pierre dans Le goût des autres, je crois que c'est important qu'il ait cette moustache. Ou alors comme une image, vous en parliez hier quand vous disiez que vous lui aviez demandé à un moment donné de ne pas regarder les autres. Parce que les gens qui sont aussi égocentriques sont beaucoup plus... sont dans leur monde et ce que je me demandais en fait, c'est est-ce qu'au moment de l'écriture, vous pensez à ces choses-là et vous les écrivez, ou est-ce que, comme vous êtes acteur aussi, ça vous vient aussi au moment où les personnages prennent vie, et comment vous abordez ces petits détails-là qui rendent vos films, je trouve, vraiment différents d'un cinéma dans lequel on a tendance souvent, comme par exemple dans certains films américains, à dire bon voilà, c'est ça le message du film.
Can I just translate that just a little bit? Just to explain the question, I was saying that the thing that she finds very subtle and intelligent and striking in the work of Agnès and Jean-Pierre is not only the dialogue that they write for the characters, but the characters' own way of being. That there are certain details, and she cited two examples. One is the moustache that Jean-Pierre wears in the beginning of the first section of Le Goût des Autres, when he's playing Castella. The moustache disappears later on. And the importance of that moustache for him and his character, and also something which was mentioned yesterday in the masterclass that they did here, which is the character of Etienne, who Jean-Pierre played in Comme une image, Look at Me. Agnès gave him a direction when they were working on it, not to look at other people, to ignore the other people who were coming in, so he wasn't attentive to other people's needs and such. And it's these little details which fill out the characters and are very striking. And the questioner wants to know if these details are something which are incorporated at the moment of writing, if that's something which is done from the off, so to speak, or if those arrive later on, at which point these details come in to enrich the script. So just,
thank you. I speak English because I feel more intelligent in English. The devil is in the detail. It's a French sentence from Le Diable.
It's perfectly workable.
We know English too.
Okay.
The English probably think it's English.
No, I don't know. Maybe nobody invented a floating sentence. Yes, it's true, of course, and it's also so exciting. I mean, the way, for example, we are presenting to somebody, and there is somebody famous, somebody not, and the way you just say hello, the way you look into the eyes or not, the way you ignore the person not famous, the way you, or the wife, for example, all these things are so meaning things about characters. So of course it's our big joy to describe them, and also the misunderstanding we can have with details. Somebody is not saying hello to you, maybe because he's shy, maybe because he didn't see you. You can conclude so many things about that politesse. And the opposite. Suddenly somebody that you don't like after say, oh, hello. It's strange, but suddenly you like him very much. And at this moment you change your opinion. You know, all these, yes, details are so interesting to me and so significant.
So when do they come, I guess, when you were writing?
When they come?
What point do they come?
I'm sorry, it was a question. No, writing. No, at the beginning. Sometimes on the set, but very rarely. It's already done before.
But it happens. But it is part of. Recently did a Mike Lee masterclass at the London Film School where he was explaining about it's an early film he did for Channel 4. I'm trying to remember a title now. Meantime. But he explained that at the very first day that the actors all met, they decided there was a family of people who were very, very short-sighted. And if you remember Meantime, it's a film where everything is about people being short-sighted. They all have thick glasses. But I'd never thought about it before he said, well, we had to make a first decision. The first decision we made about all of them was none of them could see across the room. So you look at the film again. We have another question there in the middle. You're looking at the watch, but you're all right.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Hello?
Yes.
This is really a question for the whole board, especially as actors and also writers. How much would you say that you leave to the actors to bring out the characters? I mean, you've told us a lot about how much detail you put into writing the characters, but how much would you say you leave the actors to sort of finally finish off in perfection the characters themselves? And secondly, do you find you have to stray very far from yourself to capture the character that you're trying to portray?
In fact, I don't. In fact, I don't let the actors bringing so many things. I mean, I don't think they are unhappy with me when I direct them, but we speak together about the clothes, the things, the hair, but as I said already, they don't improvise, and yes, they can propose me some things, but
yeah, so they can suggest a way of playing the role, but it has to correspond to what's been written, obviously.
very often we write thinking about the actors in mind.
Specific actors?
Specific actors, yes. This is very helpful. So generally the actors who accept the part corresponds to the part in a way. And so I never had difficulties with, I don't know, somebody. Yes, once with Gérard Lanvin, he came with a notebook full of ideas and different ways of saying things, and but I must say the truth, I didn't keep a lot of what he proposed. So, yes.
And how far you have to go from yourself to, is that the second part of the question?
Yeah, really it was, because you said especially that you take inspiration from people that you know personally, and if they're sort of very, very close to you, then how hard is it to succinctly get out what you're trying to extract from their particular character, to mould into a new character for your own film?
One of you. How you take things, they take things from people that they know.
Well, you must be very close to people that you take inspiration from.
Oh.
So, do you find it hard to be so close to them and write?
Oh, you mean if
But you think
there's
you're
somebody...
exploiting all your connections in the way that you write about them? Is there a problem with the proximity of the model? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm sort of trying to get at, is it hard to be close to the person that you're trying to portray, as in the real life person that you know, your friend, and take parts of their character to mould a new character? Do you find that it's hard, it's easy to keep that relationship with your friend, or you have to move away from them?
No, not at all. At the opposite, it's easy. The difficult thing for us is to write about people we don't know. For example, Le Goût des Autres at the beginning was a thriller, and we tried to write about a hashish dealer and burglar and things like, and men like that. But we didn't know. I mean, we didn't know the burglar. So so it was so hard to invent that character. I mean, I don't know how it is to be in the mind of somebody who steals, and so at the moment we wrote just cliché again, because we wrote what we saw in the movies, in fact, or what we thought a burglar would be. And so
you didn't research, you didn't go to a shop and take something.
No, it was not enough, you know, to that. And so it, the character stayed of the, well, so we began another movie.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more question.
Yeah, I'm talking about text and subtext, because some characters they really, like, it's very rare that they can have 100% subtext, and others they differ, like they find ways to disguise in fact what they want to say really. And if there's principles for you while you're writing, like criteria, how you decide about this, or if it's really something that comes just from like the inspiration of the moment while you write the text.
subtext.
Yeah.
Well, the British idea about subtext is different from the American. I don't think what it's like in Europe. In America, it's just what's not in the dialogue. So you may have an action in the scene which actually goes against what the dialogue is saying, and that can stick that's a subtext. But the British is really about the psychological depths or hang-ups or whatever of the writer or the director, and that moves into the scenario without perhaps even knowing it's there. So everyone has a subtext when they're writing. In fact, they're probably writing because of the subtext. And when you're young, you don't know what it is. When you're older, you do know, but it's very important to be able to use it but not rely on it. Don't say, oh, I'm not going to get that hang-up out and put it all over the page. You have to, I mean, in my one it's about grief and it's about separation, so it'll find its way into an awful lot of my screenplays, but I didn't know until I was about 35 or 40 that that was a fact was there. When you look back and you see some sort of, that this element is in a lot of the scripts. So it's a really important part of the writing process. But as I say, you just want to keep it hidden so they don't and not kind of use it.
It's very interesting. So we have to read it.
It's two different things. It's two different way of because you're talking about the theme, really, no?
No, beneath the theme.
Beneath the theme.
Yeah.
We're talking about what the writer really wants
Like
to write about.
subconscious,
Whatever he writes, he must write about.
the point of view of the writer.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether he was talking about the more American way.
No, in fact, like each character in the piece, like has some kind of subtext, doesn't he? And some like in the dialogue, they really say things straight out, like I don't know, they're carry. And others they don't. Usually they don't, because usually people don't. And so if, but what are the criteria? Like do you think about these things consciously while you're writing? Like you say, okay, this guy really knows. He's always straight about things, and what are the criteria to say when one character he charges right ahead and the other one he's like kind of finding different ways and this guy's ways of saying what he wants. Maybe there's like some kind of
But that's the most interesting about writing. That's what you want to kind of do all the time. You want to try and find out.
Yeah, this is the reason I want to talk about it.
In a way, you're talking about because there's a description that we use to say with some writing on the nail, which means that we're describing either we're describing what we already see, so it's illustrative, or there is no subtext in the sense that we're saying what we have to say, but no more. So obviously, if you switch on cable television at 1 in the morning and you say, "Baby, I love you, let's get out of here," or whatever, it's obligatory in a film, and then they jump in a car and drive off, then that's sort of the thing that's without subtext. That's your definition of subtext, which is maybe a bit different from Troy. I mean, I'm very interested in Troy saying, having an idea at the age of 40, you say, okay, I think this is what I'm writing about all the time, but I've just got to go on anyway. I mean, do other people in the panel have some anything they want to tell us about what they're writing about? Or always? Is there something that you notice in your writing together, the two of you, themes that keep coming back, whatever the subject, that you allow just to run as a vein through everything you do?
Yes.
Can you describe them?
Yes. All of our movies could be named. No, the title
If we call
Pride and Prejudices. It quite always speaking about conformism and the difficulty of having your own life, your own point of view, to escape the weight of the conformism of
expectations.
Yeah, but of the society, of the family, of the advertising, of the images we are so full of to try to be happy, and for us it's ça nous empêche plutôt d'être heureux sous ce poids-là.
So that prevents happiness.
Yeah. To compare all the time to Proust, sondage.
To poll.
Yeah, what I should do and to be somebody.
So do you know yet what is your subject? What your work is?
Well, I know all ladies and obese people.
But that's the surface.
I quite like to actually describe very solitary characters which are able to communicate. And people who from the outside will be quite weak, but inside will be very strong. Be able to cross the Atlantic on a pedal.
What about you, Laurence?
I think about yearning and the gaps between the reality and what people's aspirations and yearning forward.
Well, that's very, very interesting to get those answers.
Ben, can I just something which is not to do with what's just been talked about, forgive me about subtext, but just to let you know, those of you who are hesitating about whether you're coming back in here at 6 or just after 6 to see the reading of the Tati script, which is the basis of Sivan's film project, is that what isn't in the program is that there will be a certain visual element to that as well. I don't mean the people on the stage, I mean that you'll be able to see something of the preparatory work that Sivan is doing on the film. So it's
that would be it's basically a storyboard shot with the sounds and everything and some animation on it. So I can show it because you wouldn't ordinarily show a storyboard, but because it's really precise and it's almost like a little film, so I think that's a good idea to show it.
Yeah, so there's a little extra for you. You get to familiarize yourself with the scenario, and then immediately afterwards you'll get to see this animated storyboard, which is quite something rare to see. I just wanted to put that in before.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. So I think it's almost, I don't know what time it is actually, but I think it's almost time. Unless there's one really burning last question, but I'm looking to see if there is. If there isn't, there's somebody sort of burning there very quickly.
Hello, it's just a quick one. The thing that seems to unify all of the films you worked on is they're all very, very funny. And I wondered if you perceived the difference between the French sense of humour and the English sense of humour.
A square box and a round box.
German sense of humor.
I don't know, I admire the English sense of humor for sure. That's all I can say.
I think something's funny, something's not funny.
No, of course, but
I think the British people are taking it very seriously. It's a very serious humor. Yeah, humor is a very serious thing. And it's also a way to actually to expel a lot of frustration and things like that. And sometimes it's more violent.
I think English can say the most horrible things first, stay very calm and very cool.
Yeah.
And that's makes the difference between the French and the English person.
I don't know if anyone heard that. The lady at the front said that the English can say the most horrible and disgusting things, but in a very calm way, which is what Castro said.
Everything can fall apart, but they stay very smart. And the French is too passionate to stay, very smart. They just burn things out.
Enfin, moi, je trouve surtout que c'est le genre de question qui nous force plutôt à généraliser. On sait bien que que généraliser, c'est pas bon pour la santé.
Jean-Pierre there was saying that this is the kind of question that forces you to generalise, and we know that generalising is not very good for the health.
Well, at this point I want to say, of course there was always a suspicion with this debate that if you take out something, you know, if you took character or action or structure, and in this case you take dialogue and you try and separate it from everything else that's going on, whether you're talking about people absolutely at top of their form who are making films, in a way there's something very ridiculous about the abstraction of it. So not a lot of pure light comes out of the debate. On the other hand, a lot of other things, I think, have come out very interestingly. I want to go around the panel and ask them if there's something about dialogue in cinema which is totally obvious that we should have begun with, which we haven't said. And also if there's a favourite line of dialogue of somebody else's that they want to tell us about from the movies.
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect. Okay, so we have one contribution. Troy, do you have a... No. No. Okay.
Un moment dans Les Bronzés.
Very important French Institute movie, Les Bronzés.
Very French view. Il y a Gérard Jugnot qui fait du ski, enfin, c'est dans une leçon de ski. Alors il part et puis le moniteur il dit c'est quoi son défaut principal. Et il y a Velasco qui fait l'égoïste.
Oui, je ne suis pas responsable de tout.
Are you going to translate that?
I don't know, I can actually continue.
No, don't translate it.
No.
Okay, so that will remain untranslated. I want you to help me thank very much our very well-informed and interesting and even I must say glamorous panel, and I encourage you, after Paul's words about it, to come to what is really going to be the most extraordinary avant-premiere of a movie which is not yet made, which is the next programme today. But first of all, thank you all very, very much.